Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Doctor's Lounge with myself, Dr. Imad Alauddin, and always with me is Dr. Sajjad. And today we're going to be talking about, well, the world of medicine, and in particular, something we've been seeing a lot more of, a little bit more of shortages in medicine. And we're going to go through a few things, and to try and help us get an insight as to what's been going on, we have with us a special guest, Habib Rehman, who is a pharmacist working in Cardiff. And been there for a few years now. Habib, do you want to give yourself a little bit of an introduction, give us a bit of an insight as to what you do?
So I'm Habib. I work in community pharmacy within a health centre. I've been there since 2013. Been qualified for over 10 years now, I think. So I work face-to-face with patients. Have close contact with GPs, with other healthcare professionals, all under one roof, which is quite nice. And it's nice in that if there's ever an issue of any sort, it's quite easy to get into contact with the GPs or the receptionists, whoever we need, just by walking into the doors. And it's sad that not everyone else has the luxury of doing that. So I understand from working in other places, it'd be sort of picking up the phone call, speaking to the receptionist and waiting for the GPs to call back, which wasted a lot of time, I think, in particular if the query was urgent. That's me basically, in a nutshell. Anything else you want me to add to that?
No, I think that's
challenging times because the one thing that really sort of turns me on, is sort of switches me on about the whole when a pharmacist phones and says, "Is this the dose you meant?" Sometimes you've done it right and sometimes you've done it wrong, really. But when you've done it right, you're thinking, "Yeah, that's what I mean." I think everybody's experienced that. So
yeah, especially if it's something prescribed in sort of secondary care, for example, the doses tend to be a bit unusual and it gets carried out and continued within the community. So if we see something new for the first time, it has to be questions just to cover everyone, really.
Yes. So I think the context basically is today that medication has been short for a while. I read somewhere 2014, since 2014, many medications have been short. HRT recently, contraceptive pills, we've, antidepressants, and recently scared about Priadel being discontinued, lithium, which obviously you have to prescribe branded. So there's always, all of these issues always come by, and I think the discussion we wanted to have today with Habib was about how do we actually manage that as a GP or as a pharmacist? How do you get around that? Because the medication shortages will happen always. In 2017, there was a Chinese factory problem or something in which a lot of shortages happened. And now recently, there's also the question of Brexit going to do to the medication pool, especially if there's a no-deal Brexit. So that's it. I've got my Brexit in here. We talked about Brexit. And for example, in COVID-19, the usual COVID-19 thing is that quinine suddenly disappeared from the market when Trump mentioned that it was one of the miracle cures. Imad, what do you think?
Well, yeah, I think you're right. The scenario that we see is GPs usually prescribe something, like you said. HRT is my biggest bugbear, especially things like patches and some of the other ones. Alest, for example, been a big problem with that. And these women have been on it for some time, many years in some cases. And then you prescribe it as normal, and then it comes back as not in stock. And you're thinking, well, what on earth am I going to prescribe as an alternative? And the patients, they don't like changing at all, one bit. You tell them, oh, try this, is this something different? And they're like, oh, well, doctor, I don't know, this suited me. With the other ones, I had side effects. Is it the same exact medication as Alest is to the microgram? And you're just thinking, oh, I don't need the stress. I've got 101 other things to be doing. and then you prescribe something different, which is an alternative to LS, for example. And sometimes that even comes back as well, saying, oh, we haven't got that in stock either, because other people have been prescribing that to try and overcome the problem in the first place. So it becomes quite time consuming for us as GPs. And I think the other report that came out is obviously driving up the cost as well, because the cost of some of these medications that we're switching to is much higher than the original ones.
Yeah.
The biggest example I can think of is fluoxetine. So fluoxetine, the 30 milligram capsule wasn't available for some time, so we're giving 20s and 10. And I don't know if you've ever checked the price of a 10 milligram of fluoxetine. It's extortionate. Habib will give a much more accurate figure compared to like the 20, which is like pennies. The 10 milligrams is what I think, is it £39 something for a pack, Habib?
Yeah, it's a lot more expensive, which is
Is it still on under trademark, or is it not generic?
It's generic, but it's still considerably more expensive than the 20s. But I think Amad's referring to the tablets, I think, aren't you?
I think the tablets, yes, right. I think I said capsule, but yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, but the capsule's available. I think, I might be wrong, but I think that might be a bit cheaper than that. But it's funny you mentioned that, because we had an email today about the SSP, so the Serious Supply Protocol, regarding fluoxetine. I'm hoping it's landed in the inboxes of most pharmacies. So it means when we do see fluoxetine 30, which I'll be honest, not very often. I think I'm gonna have 1 or 2 patients on it maximum. It gives us the opportunity to then, we can triple up on the 10 milligrams or give 110 and 120 without having to hassle the GPs. As long as we endorse the prescription to say what we've given, they'll pay us accordingly then. But then you may still get some pharmacies who may be unaware contacting you or sending a prescription back saying, well, this isn't in stock, what do you want to do?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the SSP is only for a few things at the moment, isn't it? It's only something that's been newly introduced last year. So I know that fluoxetine had an SSP on it.
And
I don't know about it. Go on, sorry.
Sulfasalazine, I think, is the other one on it as well. The branded product is not available, so we can give the generic on that. But again, I'm not sure how often you prescribe that, but I don't see it that often.
Habib, do you want to explain the SSP a little bit more?
So where there is a serious shortage of a particular medication, I guess we can say the government sort of intervened and said, instead of contacting the GP for an alternative, the pharmacies themselves can make that change without having to contact anyone, and supply the closest alternative, which they would specify normally, and it should be within that bracket. So fluoxetine, for example, we've been told, like I said, you can give 3 10s or 110 and 120 milligrams to make that up, endorse it, and the pricing bureau will pay the pharmacy accordingly then, so that they're not losing out.
Okay.
I think it's a good measure for, in terms of workload, because obviously we then, as a result, pharmacies don't have to go back to the GPs and they can dispense the medicine, and GPs don't have to issue another prescription, which takes time, etc., etc. And it'd be quite useful to know some of these SSPs for ourselves. I don't know what your thoughts are, Dr. Sajjad, but if I knew, for example, there's a shortage of a particular drug when I'm prescribing it, if we had an alert system, because obviously we have the script switch in Wales where it'll give you a cheaper alternative to a drug. But if it says to you, there's a shortage of this drug, prescribe an alternative off the bat, that would be quite helpful in my opinion.
Some of the medication that I prescribe usually does that. The vision comes up. I don't know, probably there's a little man sitting somewhere in the cloud which is feeding onto vision and telling them which medication is short and which isn't available. So when it comes on the computer screen, of course, you're trying to look for something else. But I mean, even on the topics of medication, especially when because we're prescribing for our patients, and the SSP is here, it's the pharmacy which are actually helping out in healthcare by decreasing the load, as you mentioned, on the GPs. But I think there's a lot of other extra load as well. I mean, you get patients coming in asking for simple ailments like, minor ailments, which they shouldn't be really ringing the GP for. But it seems to me almost like this has been going on for some time. The message isn't going across. So, there's that problem as well. How do you sort of manage that,
Well, I think the minor ailment is just, it depends on the practice really, doesn't it? I think you have, for lack of a better term, train your population to know what they can come to the GP for. For example, our practice, we're trying our best not to prescribe any paracetamol or ibuprofen, but unfortunately there's one GP who does prescribe it, and then that whole approach suddenly falls down if you have one person who's willing to prescribe it and everyone else isn't, because everyone knows just to go to that one other doctor. And then they'll turn around and say, well, Dr. X gave it to me, why are you not giving me any? So I think that's more of a case, if you have a strong front and say, listen, okay, paracetamol, ibuprofen, we're not going to give you, go to the pharmacy. Antihistamines, we're not going to give you. Creams, we're not going to give you. Fungal stuff for toenails, you can get from the pharmacy, you don't need to the GP. Then people will slowly learn. I think because some of us are a bit too soft or kind natures, we give in a little bit too easily sometimes, and as a result, patients know they can get it from us for free. So
or even get blackmailed into a prescription. I'm sure it's happened to a lot of people listening here, and all of us.
What information have they got on you, Dr.
Yeah. Okay.
I think what me and Dr. Sajjad was saying earlier with regards to that, the problem with Choose Pharmacy is you're very limited to what you can supply for per ailment. Now, if you've got a patient who's very particular about having something or a particular brand, they're not going to want to use that service. They're going to go to the GP and say, I want Benadryl, for example, or I want so-and-so brand. I don't want the generic that the pharmacy is going to give me. Mm-hmm. And there's also that issue with trust, I guess, as well. So I was saying earlier that, we diagnosed someone with conjunctivitis. We could have given them the eye drops for free. That patient went away, came back half an hour later with a prescription for chloramphenicol, and we thought, really? I was about to give it to you, but you went to the GP to waste their time over something that we could have done in the pharmacy. So it's about educating the patients as well, which can be quite difficult at times. I don't think they realize the potential in the pharmacy and how much they can actually do.
Well, I think patients know what pharmacies can do, because when they go to Spain, they end up buying a lot of medication from the pharmacy. Yeah. They go to Turkey, they can just get anything over the counter, It's just here in the UK that is suddenly, they don't use. I think in England it's probably a bit different because you have to pay a prescription charge. So you wouldn't want paracetamol, you can buy it for 90p in Tesco's. Or supermarket that we shouldn't brand because we're not advertised, but in Wales the prescriptions are free, so they rather save that and get a prescription. But of course there are many factors for that. The issue here is obviously with the shortages and how you can replace things. I mean, lithium would have been a challenging one, I think, because of coming off the and that decision's been reversed. So now we're being told that we're not going to have any more shortage of Priadel. Similarly, I mean, with the medication, it doesn't strictly fall under the medication, but for example, the reagents for blood tests, Roche had some issues with supply chain or some other problems. And, even the investigations that we order normally, we were starting to think twice about, does the patient actually need this blood test, because we don't want to waste, so the wastage comes to it. What I'm sort of thinking about it is because when all of this discussion started about medication shortages and blood tests and everything, I'm thinking about my practice back in Pakistan, when it's a poor country and medication, prescriptions, everything comes out of the pocket. So when you're prescribing something, you actually look at the person's affordability of what they can afford. So you tend to prescribe cheaper things, and you tend to prescribe, generic doesn't work there. So you have to prescribe branded, because different brands are at different prices. And it's thinking twice about, do I actually need to prescribe this, because this person won't be able to afford this medication. So I think we have to bring that mindset to the UK, especially after the amount of funding that's been done, the Brexit coming in, the financial situation at the moment, the general willpower of the people now, I think it's probably, quite low. So I think we need to step up as a doctor and actually think, do I actually need to prescribe this? And patient education goes a long way with that as well.
Definitely. I think I'm going to say the big C word. Unfortunately, COVID has not helped the situation either.
No.
Everything we talk about these days is related back to COVID. With people being furloughed, people being out of work, so trying to make those small things go further, and if they can get something free from us, then why wouldn't they? But I think as well, from a supply point of view, it's affected the supply chains more. And I don't know about you, Habib, what your experience is, but I feel as GPs were probably prescribing more, or at least we were at the beginning of all this, prescribing more medications whilst we moved to a phone triage system than perhaps we would have seeing patients face to face. That's my personal opinion on the matter, and I don't think that's helped things either. I don't know what you've seen in the pharmacy.
Yes.
Dr. Sajjad, you've seen in your own practice.
I think the prescribing is a lot better now. It's kind of plateaued out a bit more. Definitely in the beginning, there was a big rise. I think sort of the GPs closed the door and everything was done over the phone, video calls.
Correction, no GP actually ever closed the door. The doors are open. But it's just because the waiting room, oh, no, I got to stand up here. The waiting room cannot accommodate social distance, patients more than 4 or 5 in it. So you don't want to.
Yeah, sorry.
You don't want to see.
What I mean by closing the doors is not actually physically seeing them. Sorry.
Yeah.
But I did read an article somewhere to say, I think prescribing, I said the month of March or April went up by about 10%, which is massive, absolutely massive. But then within pharmacies themselves, the pharmacies were either very lucky or very unfortunate, because the scatter of prescriptions went to different areas. So some pharmacies really, really lost out. And I'm guessing the closer pharmacies to the GPs, where patients would have automatically gone to, had really benefited from that. So, I know a pharmacy in St. Mellons, they're not too far from each other. One lost 30% of their business, and the other one gained 30% of the business, and they're still going strong today. That's a big chunk.
I think it tends to bite back, doesn't it? I mean, when you get a paper in the morning saying the flu vaccine's been given by the pharmacist, you sort of tend to think, well, that was my patient. I could have done the flu vaccine, and I lost on that. So I think serves them right. Yeah,
but I think you're right. We have ended up focusing on a few more local pharmacies who actually provide a better service, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
The ones that we choose will collect from us twice a day. So patients can get their scripts quite quickly, whereas other ones will collect once a week. And as a result, we're telling patients, listen, you can go to this pharmacy that you normally go to, but you have to wait at least a week for your medicine. Or you go to this pharmacy, which is closer to us, we're coming twice a day and you'll get it tomorrow. And so as a result, patients are going there. But then that has a knock-on effect as well, because eventually they'll run out of stock and they'll have to go to the pharmacies to find medicines that are hard to get.
Yes.
So it sort of swings and roundabouts in a way. And I think the ones that provide better service, I think, actually have made significant ground in terms of getting more patients coming to them for their prescriptions.
The other thing about shortages is like the important bread and butter prescriptions of general practice, like hypertension, diabetes, cardiac issues. A lot of them you can sort of find a way to replace by going to another. Because, for example, there's a list of calcium channel blockers and alpha blockers and ACE inhibitors that you can sort of, ARBs, you can sort of work around and get things sorted. But of course, it's going to take time for sort of settling that, the blood pressure, whatever it is, in a sort of a uniform way. But I'm sure there are medications which we can't replace. I mean, HRT is one you mentioned. Is there anything else that comes to mind that's a bit of a, do you think, a conundrum if it was to be shot?
Diltiazem is my biggest bugbear. Because I think about 3 or 4 lines are continuously out of stock. And I think one of the lines which people were using has a specific dosage, and you can't get that dosage in another line on the one that's available. And it's just, you just go around in circles, sending strips back and forth, and they say, oh, we haven't got this one, we got this one, we got this one, but this is not modified release, this is standard release.
Yes.
And it's just,
which makes me think,
just a headache all the time.
What happens when digoxin goes short? I mean, that's going to be a bit of an issue, isn't it?
Well, has it gone short? Is it, are you just predicting that?
He's predicting it's going to go out of stock.
I'm just throwing a spanner in the wheels. So if there was an issue with digoxin, that's going to be a problem, isn't it?
Well, you just put on a beta blocker.
Imiodarone goes back.
No. I think you're right. Most things have got a workaround. I think some things, like you said, which you have to prescribe the branded version rather than the generic, that's where you're going to have some issues. Most cardiology drugs you've got an alternative to. Diltiazem is the only one that I've had issues with, but yeah, if you can't get amlodipine, you'll give flodipine, or you'll give something completely different, like indapamide. So I think they're not the issue. Then the ones which are very sort of unique drugs, which don't have any alternatives. So, if, for example, I think even with sumatriptan, the only use you have with sumatriptan is for migraines, and if that goes down the drain, then you're going to be switching a whole population of people onto maybe a different triptan, which maybe not be as effective.
Yeah.
But we don't know what will happen, as you mentioned briefly before, and we're going to have to come to it, is if there is a no-deal Brexit, there'll be a lot of issues with supplies. A lot of the stuff comes from Europe. And one of the articles that we were reading in preparation for this was saying that the lorries that come in may be delayed by 2 or 3 days. And whilst that may not seem like a lot, just sounding it, actually it'll cause huge problems with delays to prescriptions, and it'll be chaos with patients trying to get their medications on time just those few days because of the number of medications we're importing in from Europe.
I think there was a plan from the MHRA or MRHA. I always get confused about keeping a stockpile of 6 weeks or so, which I think would be there. But I also think that apart from the blood pressure medication and all those other things, I think we should be prescribing more about alternative forms of treatments, exercises and gyms and clubs and things like that, and books, which really help. I mean, if somebody's becoming a type 2 diabetic, why can't we prescribe a keto diet or a very, very low carb diet? and actually help them in that regard so they can come off the medication for life and actually prevent other future problems from developing. I mean, for years and years, we've been preaching people to eat starchy food, and now suddenly don't eat starchy foods. So I think things are, you know, there's a lot of way around it. And I think what we got to do is see what are the alternatives and really, really think outside the box, thinking laterally.
Well, that's what they say, isn't it? And in adversity, you'll find people become much more innovative.
Yes.
And we'll find solutions to where there are problems.
Yeah.
So I think until we're in that situation, things won't change, because it's easy now just to do what we're doing.
Yeah.
It's like COVID. Before they were trying to push remote consultations, video consultations, and the GP was like, well, no, we're quite comfortable with what we're doing. Thank you very much. As soon as COVID came, I was like, oh, okay, we'll take it on. Give us a technology. And overnight, things changed.
Yes.
Zoom wasn't even a thing before, a few months ago. I'd never heard of Zoom.
I wish
everyone's using it.
I wish I had invested in Zoom.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you imagine?
So I think the same thing with medicines. Until it gets to the point where we're struggling to get all the medicines, our practice won't change. And unfortunately, that's the way of the world. When it comes to the pressure and the crunch time, then we'll start changing things. And at that point, it may be too late. But that's my bleak overview on the situation to come.
I agree. Situation is really bleak.
I think we've reached a natural conclusion.
We have reached
rather depressing note.
Yeah, the conclusion is that, you know, medication shortage is about to happen, and I don't know what the future holds.
I mean, this was, I think, the whole idea behind the SSP, though, wasn't it? I think in anticipation of a no Brexit deal, because we know there's going to be plenty of shortages, so they've developed this. So that list, I know there's only a couple on there at the moment, but I'm assuming we'll get considerably larger, no doubt, as we have issues with that. HRT has been the most horrific thing in the world, I think. He's contacted me, God knows how many times a day, to try and get an alternative. But the alternative to the alternative is out of stock. But there was an issue, wasn't it, with the companies exporting them, I believe, for several months. But there has been a ban on that. But I'm surprised LS, again, hasn't come back into stock quite yet.
I think these things are going to carry on, really. And the only way I can think of a solution for this is that when you're doing a prescription, try not to prescribe and try to explain. But when you do the prescription, also tell the patient you might get it, you might not get it.
It's true, but at the same time, I think if you're next to a pharmacy, it might be worth, because we normally get out of stock bulletins every week, so just check with them what's some of the main drugs, what have you not got, and what can you give as an alternative. So with my GPs, for example, we know LS is out of stock, so I'll say, you know what, instead of LS Duet, for example, try this one, or instead of that one, I have got this one. I've got these patches, but this tablet has got the exact same thing in it. Try that. And it's worked a lot better, especially like you were saying, the Stexrol. I think 95% of my patients are on Stexrol. So when that happened, it was a nightmare. So we tried sourcing anything that we can. We've managed to get hold of a couple of generic brands, Sunvit, etc. We just went to the GP and said, are you happy for us to just give this out instead? Because they were getting phone calls from every pharmacy saying, this is unavailable, what can you do? Well, there's not much else you can do. It's vitamin D. If you haven't got it, you haven't got it.
Yeah.
So we did that, and they were quite happy then to amend the prescriptions after we had done it. A bit like the SSP, but I don't know, tweak on it, I guess. But you have to have that relationship and that trust with the GP practice to be able to do that. And we do that with a lot of medications when they go out of stock, is liaise with the GPs initially so that they know what they're prescribing and not wasting the time, and we tend to give, we can get a date with when they're due back in stock as well. So we'll say, you know what, this is out of stock, due back at the end of, say, November, roughly. So in the meanwhile, can you prescribe this? When it comes back into stock, we'll let you know. So I think partnership is very important. Otherwise, you're going to be prescribing the same thing, and the same pharmacy is going to be contacting you saying, actually, we haven't got this in stock. We haven't got this in stock.
It's quite useful then, actually, maybe every week, just to have a quick chat with your pharmacist and be like, well, what's on the out of stock list? What's the alternatives to all this stuff? Okay, we'll tell our doctors not to prescribe it, or it's almost like having a local SSP between your surgery and the pharmacy, saying, oh, you actually accidentally prescribed Dextrol, then change it to Invita or something.
Yeah, it tends to be a bit more difficult with patients when you sign the repeat prescriptions, because they're going to be done automatically, aren't they? So it depends on that relationship with the pharmacy, whether they're happy to give the alternative and then have the prescription amended. But I mean, we came to a conclusion where little changes. So if something's being prescribed generically, they were happy for us to prescribe a certain brand. Or if they did a brand, they were happy to give for us to give the generic. Apart from the special drugs that need to be prescribed by a brand, of course. And there's little things like that have helped us so much. So we've just not nagged each other as much, I don't think, during the COVID period. To put nicely.
But I think you could be on something, because I think you're benefiting, obviously, because you're in the same building as your GP, right? You're in the same locale, so that makes things a lot easier. But I think we've got a pharmacy. Well, we've got a pharmacy which is not too far away, and just liaising with them and saying, listen, this is something we've thought about. Is not a bad idea. And I think perhaps GPs who are listening in will maybe take that on board themselves and take that into their own practice to try and make things a bit more efficient and try and cut down the time they're spending redoing prescriptions without a stock or whatever other issues that may crop up on a week-to-week basis, especially with all the uncertainty going on in the world at the moment.
Well, that was a nice chat.
I think that's a better ending for the other one.
A bit of a better ending. Positive. So don't worry, folks. Got plenty of medications. Our pharmacists are there to help us.
I think work in partnership with your local pharmacists. I think things will look up. Great. So I think, unless anyone else has any other closing remarks, I think we'll call it a day there, and we'll see you again next week. Just remember, if you do enjoy our podcast, then subscribe and share with your friends and colleagues. And if you think you have something you want us to talk about, or you want to even come on the show, then drop us a message and we'll try and talk about a particular topic, or even get you on to talk about it with us. So yeah, thank you again for listening, and we'll see you again next time. Bye for now.